Grindelwald's War, 1920s to 1945. Before Harry Potter even exists, the wizarding world is already getting absolutely wrecked by this other dude named Grindelwald. This guy is basically the OG dark wizard who comes way before Voldemort, and he's running around from roughly the 1920s all the way to 1945, causing absolute chaos across the globe. We're talking a full-blown international wizarding conflict here, not just some UK drama, but legit worldwide destruction. Here's the deal. Grindelwald was convinced that wizards should straight up rule over non-magical people, which he called muggles. He didn't think they should just hide forever and pretend they don't exist. Nah, he thought wizards were superior and deserved to be in charge. His whole philosophy was basically for the greater good, which sounds nice on the surface but is actually just fascist propaganda dressed up in fancy robes. He traveled around Europe gathering followers who believed the same thing, building this massive dark wizard movement that got bigger and scarier every year. The war wasn't just some abstract philosophical debate happening in coffee shops either. Real magical violence broke out. Grindelwald's forces attacked magical communities, clashed with government officials, and destabilized entire regions. The International Statute of Secrecy, this ancient agreement that keeps wizards hidden from muggles, was constantly under threat because Grindelwald's war was making it harder to keep magic secret. Muggles were definitely noticing something weird was going on. This is where Albus Dumbledore comes in, and it's a huge moment in his story. Before Dumbledore became the legend who fought Voldemort, he was already actively opposing Grindelwald's movement. Dumbledore was basically the guy leading the resistance against this dark wizard takeover. The two of them ended up being the most powerful wizards of their generation, which meant the whole conflict eventually boiled down to these two titans clashing. Their showdown in 1945 ended Grindelwald's war, and actually marked one of the few times a dark wizard got completely crushed militarily instead of just disappearing or going into hiding like cowards. Grindelwald's capture was a big deal because it proved that organized resistance against dark wizards could actually work. It showed the magical world that tyranny could be stopped. But here's the thing, this victory didn't mean peace lasted forever. Grindelwald's ideology didn't just vanish when he got locked up. The First Wizarding War, 1970 to 1981. We move forward a few decades and the wizarding world thought they were chilling, right? Wrong. Enter Lord Voldemort, and honestly, this guy makes Grindelwald look like a rehearsal. Voldemort's war kicks off around 1970 and runs until about 1981, and it's basically a reign of absolute terror across the UK magical community. This isn't some philosophical debate about wizard supremacy anymore. This is straight up violent chaos with dark wizards called Death Eaters, murdering families, destroying homes, and turning the entire wizarding world upside down. Voldemort's whole deal was different from Grindelwald's public revolution. Voldemort actually wanted to stay hidden while simultaneously destroying everything. He and his Death Eaters operated through terror, assassinations, and intimidation. They'd show up, kill random magical families, torture people, and then vanish into the shadows. Nobody knew when or where they'd strike next. Families were paranoid because the Death Eaters didn't have some grand plan to overthrow the government. They just wanted to create fear and chaos. Voldemort was obsessed with blood purity too, meaning he hated anyone with Muggle heritage and wanted them dead or enslaved. The magical government, the Ministry of Magic, was completely overwhelmed. They couldn't control the violence because Death Eaters had infiltrated the government itself. Some Death Eaters were actually ministry officials, which meant the good guys never knew who to trust. It was basically an internal security nightmare. Families were getting murdered in their homes. Kids were being orphaned left and right. The fear was absolutely suffocating the magical community. This is where the real heroes of the story started stepping up. Groups of witches and wizards banded together to fight back against Voldemort and his Death Eaters. They called themselves the Order of the Phoenix. And these people were willing to risk their lives to stop the carnage. One of the most famous families in the Resistance was the Potters. And yeah, this is Harry's parents we're talking about. They fought against Voldemort's forces, worked with the Order, and became targets because of it. The war reached its climax in 1981 when Voldemort showed up at Godwin's Hollow, hunting for Harry Potter. James and Lily Potter died protecting their son. But something absolutely bonkers happened that night. Voldemort's killing curse backfired and nearly destroyed him completely. The Second Wizarding War, 1995 to 1998. Everyone thought Voldemort was done, dead, gone. The magical world finally had peace after over a decade of terror. They were wrong. In 1995, Voldemort came back, literally returned to power, and everything the Order of the Phoenix had fought for was about to get absolutely destroyed all over again. This second war would end up being even more intense than the first one, and the stakes got so high that the entire wizarding world was basically on the edge of total collapse. The resurrection of Voldemort in 1995 was the start of absolute panic. The Death Eaters, who'd either escaped justice or pretended to be innocent, suddenly revealed their true colors and reunited under their master's command. But here's what made this war different from the first one. Voldemort had literally come back from the dead, and nobody knew how he'd done it. The magical world wasn't just fighting a dark wizard anymore. They were fighting something that seemed impossible to kill. That alone messed with people's heads. How do you defeat someone who already died once? This time around, the Ministry of Magic was even more corrupted than before. Voldemort had placed Death Eaters and sympathizers throughout the entire government, which meant the Ministry wasn't actually fighting the Dark Forces. In some cases, the Ministry was the Dark Forces. Minister Cornelius Fudge literally refused to believe Voldemort had returned for like a year. He kept saying it was all lies and propaganda, which gave Voldemort time to rebuild his army and gather strength. By the time the Ministry finally accepted reality, Voldemort had already established a shadow government and was running operations behind the scenes. The Order of the Phoenix reformed again, now led by Dumbledore, and they knew this fight would be different. Voldemort was smarter this time, more organized, and absolutely ruthless. Death Eaters didn't just target random families anymore. They went after Order members specifically. They infiltrated Hogwarts School itself, and they created a climate of suspicion and betrayal everywhere. Students were terrified, families were divided, and nobody knew which side anybody was actually on. The war built up slowly at first, then exploded into full-scale chaos. By 1997 and 1998, every magical institution was under threat. Voldemort created Horcruxes, objects that made him literally impossible to kill through normal means, which meant defeating him required finding and destroying these objects first. The entire final year of the war centered around a desperate hunt for Horcruxes, while simultaneously fighting Death Eaters, navigating government betrayals, and trying to protect innocent lives. Goblin rebellions. Alright, so while wizards are busy fighting wizards, there's this whole other conflict happening that people don't talk about nearly enough. The Goblin rebellions. Goblins aren't just the little dudes running Gringotts Bank, man. They're their own magical society with their own rules, their own culture, and their own beef with the wizarding world. And they've been rebelling against wizard control for literally centuries. This isn't some small side conflict. It's a legit series of wars that shape the entire magical history. Here's the core problem. Goblins and wizards have fundamentally different views on ownership and rights. Wizards created laws that basically said goblins couldn't own property or have legal rights in the same way wizards do. It was discrimination, straight up. Goblins worked as craftspeople, bankers, and metalworkers, but the wizarding government wouldn't acknowledge their legal status as equals. This wasn't some small disagreement, it was systemic oppression that lasted for generations. So naturally, goblins started rebelling against these unfair laws and the wizard government that enforced them. Throughout magical history, there have been multiple goblin rebellions, and they were serious. These weren't just protests or minor skirmishes. Goblins organized armed revolts against wizarding authority. They'd coordinate attacks, gather armies, and attempt to overthrow wizard control in specific regions. The most famous rebellions happened during the 1600s and 1700s, when Goblin forces directly challenged wizarding government control. Some of these rebellions actually succeeded in getting concessions from the ministry, though Goblins never fully achieved equal legal status. The violence in these rebellions was intense. Goblins used their metalworking skills to create weapons, and they had tactical knowledge of the areas they lived in. Wizards had more advanced magic but faced an enemy that refused to back down. There were raids on wizard settlements, attacks on ministry officials, and straight-up military engagements. The rebellions repeatedly destabilized wizarding society and forced the government to negotiate or redirect military resources. What makes the Goblin rebellions important is that they're basically a parallel conflict running through the entire magical world's history. While wizards are focused on their own wars against dark wizards, goblins are fighting for basic rights and recognition. The wizarding government never fully solved the goblin problem because the core issue, inequality and lack of legal rights, was never actually addressed. It just kept getting worse, which meant tensions remained high and rebellions kept breaking out whenever opportunity knocked. Giant wars, where things get absolutely wild. While goblins are rebelling and wizards are fighting each other, there's this third faction that most people forget about: giants. And let me tell you, giants are not messing around. Giant wars throughout magical history were some of the most destructive and terrifying conflicts because we're talking about massive creatures with incredible strength and magical power. A single giant can level an entire village. An army of giants can literally reshape the landscape. Giants have been in conflict with the wizarding world for centuries, and honestly, a lot of it comes down to the same thing as the Goblin rebellions: discrimination and mistreatment. Wizards hunted giants, enslaved them, and basically treated them like monsters instead of intelligent beings. So giants fought back. Giant wars weren't organized the same way wizard wars were because giants don't have a centralized government or military structure like wizards do. Instead, you had different giant clans fighting for survival, for territory, and sometimes joining forces with dark wizards who promised them power or protection. The violence in giant wars was absolutely brutal. Giants have natural strength that magic alone can't always overcome. When a giant swings a club or throws a boulder, entire buildings collapse. Entire families die in seconds. Wizards had to use coordinated magical attacks and strategy to fight giants because individual duels were basically suicide. A giant could crush a wizard with one hand before they even finished casting a spell. This meant giant wars required massive wizarding armies working together in ways they normally didn't. It was organized warfare on a scale that individual wizards couldn't handle alone. During Voldemort's rise to power, he actually recruited giants to his side. He promised them respect, land, and the right to exist without persecution if they'd fight for him. Some giants accepted because they'd been hunted and oppressed for so long that aligning with a powerful dark wizard seemed like their only shot at survival and power. This meant during the Second Wizarding War, the Order of the Phoenix had to deal not just with Death Eaters, but with literal giant warriors attacking on Voldemort's behalf. Villages got destroyed, magical communities were terrorized. The addition of giants made Voldemort's forces exponentially more dangerous and harder to resist. What's insane is that both goblins and giants were basically pushed into these conflicts by centuries of wizarding oppression and discrimination. If the wizarding world had treated them fairly from the start, maybe these wars never happen. But instead, they created enemies out of entire species. And those enemies became serious military threats that had to be dealt with during every major conflict. The Harry Potter universe wasn't just about one wizard fighting another. It was a complex web of wars, rebellions, and conflicts involving wizards, goblins, giants, and centuries of built-up rage that nobody ever actually resolved. That's what makes the magical world so insanely brutal. Please like and subscribe.